Have you ever been completely wrong about someone? So wrong that when the truth came out it shattered everything you thought you knew? This is the story of Maya Chen, a 34-year-old woman who walked into a small-town diner on a rainy Thursday evening looking like she couldn't hurt a fly. Her soft voice, gentle demeanor, and simple clothes made everyone assume she was just another lost soul needing help. But hidden beneath her long sleeves was a tattoo that would reveal a truth so shocking it would turn an entire town's understanding upside down. A tattoo that told the story of a hero they never saw coming. A tattoo that proved that sometimes the most powerful people are the ones who choose to stay quiet. What happened that night in Millbrook's only diner would become the talk of the town for years to come. Because sometimes, the person who looks the most helpless is actually the one with the power to save everyone else. This is that story. A story about assumptions, hidden strength, and how one woman's past would become a small town's salvation. Maya Chen pulled her worn jacket tighter around her shoulders as she stepped into Murphy's Diner, the only restaurant still open in the small town of Millbrook, at 9 in the evening. The bell above the door chimed softly, causing a few heads to turn her way before quickly looking back to their meals. She was used to being invisible, and that was exactly how she preferred it. The diner was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where strangers stuck out like sore thumbs, and where gossip traveled faster than the coffee got cold. Maya chose a corner booth, sliding into the cracked vinyl seat with practiced ease. She kept her head down, her long black hair falling like a curtain around her face. "What can I get you, honey?" The waitress, Dolores, approached with a tired smile. Her name tag was crooked, and her apron bore the stains of a long day. She was the kind of woman who called everyone honey, sugar, or dear, regardless of age or familiarity. "Just coffee, please," Maya said quietly, her voice barely audible above the ambient noise of the diner. "You sure? We got some great pie tonight. Apples still warm from the oven." Dolores's eyes held genuine kindness, the sort that came from years of serving people who were just passing through. Maya shook her head politely. "Coffee's fine." As Dolores walked away, Maya pulled out a small, battered notebook from her jacket pocket. The cover was worn smooth from years of handling, and the pages were filled with her small, precise handwriting. She began to write, documenting her observations of the town, as she had done in countless others before this one. Millbrook was typical of the small communities she'd visited over the past few months. Population 3,847, according to the welcome sign at the town limits. One main street lined with locally owned shops, a post office that doubled as the town's gathering place, and a general store that sold everything from fishing gear to birthday candles. The kind of place where people left their doors unlocked and their keys in their cars. But Maya knew that even in places like this, darkness could hide in plain sight. She'd been tracking a pattern for months now, following breadcrumbs that led from one small town to another. A missing person here, an unexplained disappearance there, all young women, all last seen in towns just like Millbrook. The authorities had been calling it coincidence, but Maya knew better. She'd learned to trust her instincts long ago, and they'd rarely steered her wrong. "Here's your coffee, honey." Dolores set down a steaming mug, along with small containers of cream and sugar. "You just passing through?" "Something like that," Maya replied, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. The heat felt good against her palms, which were always cold these days. Dolores lingered for a moment, clearly wanting to chat. In a town this size, a new face was entertainment. Don't get many visitors this time of year. Most folks are heading south where it's warmer. Maya nodded politely, but didn't encourage further conversation. She'd learned that the less she said, the less likely she was to draw attention to herself. After a moment, Dolores took the hint and moved on to other customers. The diner was busier than Maya had expected for a Thursday night. A group of teenagers occupied a large booth near the window, sharing fries and laughing loudly at something on one of their phones. An elderly couple sat at the counter, the man reading a newspaper while the woman worked on a crossword puzzle. At a table near the kitchen, 3 men in work clothes discussed the upcoming construction project at the edge of town. Maya listened to their conversation without appearing to do so. It was a skill she'd honed over years of practice. The men were talking about the new development going up on the old Morrison property. Luxury cabins, they said, designed for city folks looking for a weekend escape. The project was bringing jobs to Millbrook, which everyone agreed was a good thing. "That new foreman seems like a decent enough fellow," one of the men said, taking a sip of coffee. "Quiet type, keeps to himself mostly. As long as he pays fair wages, I don't care if he never says a word," another replied. Maya made a mental note about the construction project and the foreman they'd mentioned. In her experience, newcomers to small towns warranted attention, especially when they kept to themselves. She was about to return to her notebook when the diner door opened again, this time with enough force to make the bell jangle aggressively. 3 men entered, and the atmosphere in the room shifted immediately. Conversations quieted, and several diners found sudden interest in their plates. The men looked out of place in the homey diner. They wore expensive suits despite the late hour, and their eyes swept the room with the calculating gaze of people used to being in control. The tallest of the 3, a man with silver hair and cold blue eyes, walked to the counter where Dolores stood frozen with a coffee pot in her hand. "We're looking for someone," the man said, his voice carrying easily through the now silent diner. "Young woman, Asian, about 5'4", long black hair." Maya's blood turned to ice, but she forced herself to remain still. She kept her eyes down, focusing on the coffee in her mug as if it held the secrets of the universe. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her breathing remained steady and controlled. "Can't say I've seen anyone like that," Dolores replied, her voice slightly shaky. "We don't get many strangers through here." The man's eyes swept the diner again, passing over Maya without pause. To anyone watching, she looked like exactly what she appeared to be. A tired traveler having coffee before moving on to the next town. Her posture was relaxed, her expression neutral, and nothing about her suggested she was anything other than what she seemed. "If you do see her," the man continued, pulling out a business card and placing it on the counter, "there's money in it for information about her whereabouts. Good money." He turned and walked out without another word, his companions following silently behind. The bell's cheerful chime seemed mockingly bright after their departure. Conversations gradually resumed, but the comfortable atmosphere of the diner had been shattered. Maya could feel the tension in the room. The way people's voices were lower now, more cautious. She waited another 10 minutes before standing to leave, placing exact change on the table, along with a modest tip. As she walked toward the door, she caught Dolores' eye and nodded slightly in thanks for the coffee. "You be careful out there, honey," Dolores called after her, and Maya wondered if the woman suspected something or was simply being kind. Outside, the October air was sharp and clean, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and the promise of winter. Maya walked slowly to her beat-up Honda Civic, parked in the shadows at the far edge of the lot. She forced herself to maintain a casual pace even though every instinct screamed at her to run. They'd found her trail again. Somehow, despite all her precautions, they'd tracked her to Millbrook. She'd hoped to have more time, hoped to finally get ahead of them long enough to gather the evidence she needed. But that hope was fading fast. As she drove to the small motel she'd checked into earlier, Maya's mind raced through her options. She could leave tonight, disappear into the darkness, and surface somewhere else in a few weeks. It was the safe choice, the smart choice, but it was also exactly what they expected her to do. The Sleepy Inn Motel was as forgettable as its name suggested. Maya's room was on the ground floor, third door from the office. She'd specifically requested it for the easy access to her car and the clear view of the parking lot. Old habits died hard, and in her line of work, paranoia was often the difference between life and death. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her notebook. Inside were months of careful investigation, patterns she'd identified, connections she'd made. She was close to something big. She could feel it. The disappearances, the small towns, the way local authorities seemed reluctant to investigate thoroughly, it all pointed to something organized, something with reach and resources. And now they were here, in Millbrook, looking for her. Maya stood and walked to the bathroom mirror, pulling up her sleeves for the first time in weeks. The tattoo on her right forearm seemed to pulse in the fluorescent light. It was a detailed design, intricate and meaningful, but most people who saw it only noticed the surface beauty. They missed the significance of the symbols, the story it told, the truth it represented. It was a truth she'd kept hidden for months now, a past she'd tried to leave behind. But maybe it was time to stop running. Maybe it was time to remember who she really was and why she'd started this journey in the first place. The tattoo depicted a phoenix rising from flames, but woven into the design were symbols that told a different story: military insignia, unit numbers, and dates that marked significant operations. To most people, it looked like decorative art. To those who knew how to read it, it was a record of service, a testament to skills learned and missions completed. Maya had spent 5 years in Army Special Operations, specializing in intelligence gathering and covert operations. She'd been trained by the best, had served in places most people couldn't find on a map, and had developed skills that most civilians couldn't imagine. But that was before everything went wrong. Before she'd uncovered corruption that went deeper than she'd ever imagined. Before she'd become a threat to people with the power to make her disappear permanently. She'd been forced to leave that life behind, to become someone ordinary and unremarkable. For 2 years, she'd successfully stayed hidden, working quiet jobs and keeping her head down. But 6 months ago, she'd learned about the disappearances, and old instincts had kicked in. She couldn't stand by and do nothing when innocent people were in danger. Now those same people who'd forced her into hiding had found her again. But this time was different. This time, she had something they wanted even more than her silence. She had evidence that could bring down their entire operation. The question was, would she run again, or would she make a stand? Maya looked at her reflection one more time, then pulled her sleeves back down. For tonight, she would remain invisible. Just another lost soul passing through a small town. But tomorrow, things might be different. Tomorrow, the people of Millbrook might discover that their quiet visitor was much more than she appeared to be. And if the men in expensive suits came back looking for her, they might get more than they bargained for. Maya woke before dawn, as she had every morning for the past 6 months. The digital clock on the nightstand glowed red in the darkness. 5:17 a.m. She lay still for a moment, listening to the sounds of the small town beginning to stir. A delivery truck rumbled past on the main road, its engine growing fainter as it moved toward the commercial district. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked twice and then fell silent. She rose quietly and dressed in dark jeans and a long-sleeved gray shirt, careful to ensure her tattoo remained covered. After months of practice, it had become second nature. The motel's coffee maker gurgled to life as she prepared for what might be a crucial day. The previous evening had changed everything. The arrival of the 3 men confirmed her worst fears. They weren't just looking for her anymore, they were closing in. But it also presented an opportunity. If they were here, in Millbrook, it meant this place was important to their operation. It wasn't just another stop on her investigative journey, it was a destination. Maya spread her notes across the small table by the window, organizing them into patterns that had become familiar over months of research. Missing women, all between ages 19 and 28. All from small communities with populations under 5,000. Sarah Henderson from Oakville, Montana. Rebecca Torres from Pine Ridge, Colorado. Amy Watson from Riverside, Kansas. 12 names in total, spanning 8 states. The official reports all told similar stories. Young women who'd simply vanished without a trace, leaving behind confused families and frustrated local police forces. No signs of struggle, no obvious motives, no witnesses. In each case, the investigations had stalled within weeks, victims reclassified as voluntary missing persons who'd probably left town on their own. But Maya saw what the local authorities had missed. The timing wasn't random. Each disappearance occurred within days of new construction projects beginning in or near the victims' hometowns. Luxury developments, resort communities, high-end recreational facilities. Projects that brought money and jobs to struggling small towns. Projects that local officials were eager to support. She'd tracked the paper trail through multiple shell companies and holding corporations, following the money back to its source. Every project was ultimately controlled by the same organization, Meridian Development Group. On the surface, they appeared to be a legitimate real estate development company with an impressive portfolio of successful projects. But Maya knew better. Meridian was a front for something much darker. Her phone buzzed with a text message, jolting her from her thoughts. The number was blocked, but the message was clear. Stop looking or join them. Maya deleted the message immediately and removed the battery from her phone. They were definitely here, and they were watching. The smart thing would be to pack up and leave Millbrook before they located her exact position. But smart hadn't gotten her this far, and it wouldn't save the next girl who disappeared. She gathered her notes and locked them in the small safe provided by the motel, then stepped outside into the crisp morning air. Millbrook looked different in the early light, more innocent somehow. The main street was lined with mature oak trees whose leaves had turned brilliant shades of orange and gold. Halloween decorations adorned several storefronts, and someone had placed a scarecrow next to the post office. Maya walked toward the town center, moving with the unhurried pace of someone exploring a new place. But her trained eyes cataloged everything: security cameras, sight lines, potential escape routes, vehicles that didn't belong. Years of special operations training had taught her to gather intelligence while appearing completely harmless. The Millbrook Gazette office sat between a bakery and a used bookstore, its windows displaying decades-old awards and community photos. Maya pushed open the door, causing a genuine bell to ring overhead. Unlike the electronic chime at Murphy's Diner, this one had the warm, brassy sound of authentic craftsmanship. "Help you with something?" The voice belonged to a woman in her 50s with graying brown hair and intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Her desk was organized chaos: stacks of papers, multiple coffee cups, and a computer that looked like it predated the current century. "I'm writing a travel piece about small American towns," Maya said, producing the fake press credentials she'd had made months earlier. "I was hoping to learn more about Millbrook's history, maybe talk to some longtime residents." The woman, whose nameplate identified her as Linda Kowalski, Editor brightened immediately. "Oh, how wonderful. We don't often get writers through here. Please sit down. I'm Linda, and I've been documenting this town's stories for almost 30 years. Maya settled into the visitor's chair, pulling out her notebook and pen. What makes Millbrook special? What sets it apart from other small towns? Linda launched into what was clearly a well-rehearsed overview of local history. Millbrook had been founded in 1892 by German immigrants who'd established successful grain farms. The town had thrived through the early 20th century, but began declining after World War II as young people moved to larger cities for better opportunities. We were down to about 2,800 people 5 years ago, Linda continued. Businesses were closing, the school was talking about consolidating with the county system. Honestly, we thought Millbrook might become another ghost town. But that changed? Maya prompted. Oh, yes, dramatically. The Morrison Development Project brought new life to our community. Construction jobs, increased business for local shops, plans for a tourist industry. It's been a blessing, really. Maya made notes while carefully steering the conversation. What exactly is the Morrison Project? Luxury cabin rentals on the old Morrison Ranch. Beautiful location up in the hills, about 10 miles north of town. The development company, Meridian, I think, they've been wonderful to work with, very professional, very generous with local hiring. Have there been any concerns? Sometimes development projects can be controversial. Linda hesitated for just a moment, and Maya caught it. Well, there were some initial worries about environmental impact, but Meridian addressed all those concerns. They've been model corporate citizens. What about the people living here? Has everyone been supportive? Again, the slight hesitation. Most everyone, yes. There was some opposition initially, but Linda shrugged. People change their minds when they see the benefits. Maya sensed there was more to the story, but decided not to push too hard too soon. Instead, she asked about local events and interesting residents, gradually building rapport while gathering information. After an hour of conversation, Linda offered to introduce Maya to other longtime residents who might have interesting stories to share. They walked together down Main Street, Linda pointing out historical buildings and sharing anecdotes about local characters. "Oh, there's Frank Morrison," Linda said, waving to an elderly man sweeping the sidewalk in front of the hardware store. "Frank, come meet our visiting writer." Frank Morrison was probably in his 70s, with weathered hands and deep lines around his eyes that spoke of a lifetime spent outdoors. He shook Maya's hand firmly and listened politely as Linda explained her project. "Frank's family owned the ranch where the new development is being built," Linda added. "He can tell you about the changes our community has experienced." Maya noticed Frank's expression tighten slightly when the development was mentioned. "It must have been difficult to sell family land," she said gently. "Wasn't my choice to sell," Frank replied quietly. "My granddaughter Emma handled all that before she moved away." Frank's granddaughter inherited the ranch when his son passed, Linda explained. She wasn't interested in keeping it, so she sold to Meridian last year. Maya's journalist instincts sharpened. Something in Frank's tone suggested the sale hadn't been as straightforward as Linda believed. Where did Emma move to? Frank's jaw tightened. "Don't rightly know. She left town right after the sale closed. Haven't heard from her since." An uncomfortable silence fell over the group. Linda looked surprised by Frank's response, as if this information was news to her. "I'm sure she's just busy getting settled in her new life," Linda said awkwardly. "Young people today, they get so caught up in their own worlds." Frank didn't respond to that, instead turning back to his sweeping with deliberate focus. Maya thanked him for his time and exchanged contact information with Linda before walking away. Emma Morrison, another name to add to her list of missing young women. Maya spent the rest of the morning visiting other local businesses, gradually assembling a more complete picture of Millbrook's recent changes. The story was consistent for most residents. Meridian development had brought prosperity and hope to a dying town. They'd hired locally whenever possible, contributed to community projects, and shown respect for local traditions. But there were gaps in the narrative, inconsistencies that nagged at Maya's trained instincts. Emma Morrison wasn't the only young person who'd left town recently without maintaining contact with family. The development project had faced initial opposition that mysteriously evaporated. And several residents mentioned concerns that had been addressed by Meridian without explaining what those concerns were or how they'd been resolved. By noon, Maya had a clearer understanding of the situation. Meridian had established a foothold in Millbrook through a combination of economic incentives and careful management of public opinion. They'd effectively purchased the town's cooperation, making it nearly impossible for anyone to raise serious objections to their activities. It was a perfect setup for an operation that required local cooperation and official disinterest. Small towns like Millbrook were isolated, insular, and desperate for economic opportunity. They were also exactly the kind of places where young women could disappear without generating significant outside attention. Maya was walking back toward her motel when she noticed the black sedan parked across from Murphy's diner. It hadn't been there that morning, and it stood out among the pickup trucks and aging sedans that dominated Millbrook streets. The windows were tinted too dark to see inside, but she could feel eyes watching her. She continued walking at the same casual pace, giving no indication that she'd noticed the surveillance. But internally, her mind shifted into tactical mode, assessing threats and planning responses. They'd found her location, which meant they'd probably identified her motel room as well. The question was, what did they plan to do about it? Maya entered the small general store next to the post office, using the visit as an opportunity to observe the sedan without appearing to do so. Through the store's front window, she could see two figures in the front seats. They were trying to look casual, but their positioning and alertness marked them as professionals. She purchased a few items she didn't need: a local newspaper, some snacks, a bottle of water, while mentally cataloging the store's layout. Multiple exits, clear sight lines, no obvious surveillance equipment. The elderly clerk was friendly but disinterested, focused more on his crossword puzzle than his customer. When Maya emerged from the store 15 minutes later, the sedan was gone. But she wasn't naive enough to believe they'd given up. They were repositioning, probably setting up a more comprehensive surveillance network around the town. It was time to accelerate her timeline. Maya returned to her motel room and immediately began preparing for what she suspected would be her final night in Millbrook. She packed her essential belongings into a small backpack, leaving her larger suitcase as a decoy. Her laptop contained encrypted copies of all her research, and a thumb drive hidden in her jacket held additional backup files. But most importantly, she had one piece of evidence that could expose Meridian's entire operation, a piece of evidence they would kill to keep secret. As afternoon turned to evening, Maya finalized her plans. Tomorrow, she would visit the Morrison development site, gather the last pieces of information she needed, and then make contact with the one person who might be able to help her expose the truth. She just had to survive the night first. Maya waited until 2 a.m. before making her move. The motel parking lot was empty except for her Honda and two other vehicles belonging to long-term guests. The October night was cold and clear, with a half-moon providing just enough light to navigate without needing a flashlight. She slipped out of her room through the bathroom window, a skill she'd perfected during her military service. The window was small and high, requiring flexibility and upper body strength that most people didn't possess. But Maya wasn't most people, and old habits from her special operations training died hard. Her destination was the Morrison development site, 10 miles north of town on what had once been a working cattle ranch. According to the information she'd gathered, construction was scheduled to resume the following Monday, which gave her a small window to investigate without encountering workers. Maya had studied satellite images of the property online, identifying the most likely areas for what she was really looking for. On the surface, Meridian was building luxury vacation cabins for wealthy urbanites seeking an authentic rural experience, but Maya suspected the property served a much darker purpose. She'd left her car at the motel and instead borrowed a mountain bike from the rack behind the general store. In a town like Millbrook, bikes were often left unlocked, and Maya had every intention of returning it before anyone noticed it was missing. The ride to the Morrison property took 45 minutes along back roads that wound through rolling hills and stands of pine trees. Maya kept her small flashlight dimmed and covered, using it only when absolutely necessary. Her eyes had adjusted to the darkness, and years of night operations had taught her to navigate by moonlight and instinct. The development site was larger than she'd expected. A new gravel road wound up from the main highway, leading to several clusters of partially constructed buildings. The cabins themselves looked exactly as advertised. Upscale but rustic, designed to blend into the natural landscape. But Maya wasn't interested in the cabins. She concealed the bike in a stand of trees and approached the site on foot, moving with the silent precision that had once made her one of the Army's most effective intelligence operatives. Security appeared minimal, just a few motion-activated lights and some basic perimeter fencing. For a multi-million-dollar development project, it seemed almost carelessly unprotected, unless of course they had other reasons for not wanting too much official security presence. Maya circled the construction area methodically, cataloging what she saw. The cabins were real enough, and work on them was proceeding exactly as described in the local newspaper. But there were other structures as well, buildings that didn't appear in any of the promotional materials she'd seen. Behind the main cabin complex, hidden by a natural rise in the terrain, stood a concrete block building that looked more like a small warehouse than anything related to luxury accommodations. It had no windows and only one visible entrance, with what appeared to be several ventilation units on the roof. Maya approached the building carefully, testing the door and finding it locked with both electronic and mechanical systems. The level of security was far beyond what would be needed for construction equipment or supplies. She was examining the ventilation system when she heard voices coming from inside the building. Male voices, speaking in low tones that carried clearly in the still night air. Shipment arrives Thursday night. Same protocols as before. How many this time? 6. All young, all from rural areas where they won't be missed immediately. Maya's blood ran cold. She moved closer to one of the ventilation grates, straining to hear more of the conversation. The Morrison girl cause any problems before she was transferred? Nothing we couldn't handle. Small-town girls are usually grateful for the opportunity once they understand their situation. Good. The overseas buyers are getting impatient. We need to maintain our delivery schedule. Maya had heard enough. The concrete building wasn't a warehouse, it was a holding facility. Meridian Development wasn't just building vacation cabins, they were operating a human trafficking network, using their legitimate business as cover for moving kidnapped women. She was backing away from the building when the door suddenly opened, flooding the area with light. Maya dropped flat behind a stack of construction materials, her heart hammering as footsteps approached her position. "Thought I heard something out here," one of the men said. His voice matched one she'd heard through the ventilation grate. "Probably just an animal. These hills are full of deer and raccoons." "Maybe, but check the perimeter anyway. We can't afford any surprises this close to the shipment." Maya counted 3 distinct voices, all male, all speaking with the casual professionalism of people accustomed to violence. She remained motionless as they conducted a brief sweep of the immediate area, their flashlight beams passing within feet of her hiding spot. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 10 minutes, the men returned to the building and shut the door. Maya waited another 20 minutes before moving, ensuring they weren't coming back. She had what she needed, confirmation that Meridian was trafficking women through their development projects. But she also had a new problem. If they were expecting a shipment Thursday night, that meant 6 more young women were about to disappear, unless she could stop it. Maya made her way back to the bike, her mind racing through options. She could contact the FBI, but that would take time she didn't have, and her own fugitive status complicated any official cooperation. She could try to warn local law enforcement, but if Meridian had bought the cooperation of an entire town, they might have bought some badges as well. Or she could handle it herself. The ride back to Millbrook was faster than the trip out, adrenaline and purpose overriding caution. Maya returned the bike to where she'd found it and slipped back into her motel room through the bathroom window. By her estimation, she had less than 18 hours before the trafficking operation's next phase began. She powered up her laptop and began typing rapidly, documenting everything she'd seen and heard at the Morrison site. The report included detailed descriptions of the location, the building layout, the conversation she'd overheard, and her assessment of the security measures in place. But evidence alone wouldn't save the 6 women who were scheduled to arrive Thursday night. For that, she needed a different kind of plan. Maya opened a secure communication app and composed a message to a contact she'd hoped never to use again. Marcus Chen, no relation despite the shared surname, was a former Special Forces operator who'd left the military around the same time Maya had been forced into hiding. He now worked as a private security consultant, taking jobs that regular law enforcement couldn't or wouldn't handle. Need immediate assistance with tactical situation. Human trafficking operation. Multiple victims at risk. Millbrook, Montana. Time critical. Will provide full briefing if you can respond. She encrypted the message and sent it through channels that would be nearly impossible to trace. Then she began preparing for what might be a very dangerous night. Maya had packed light when she'd gone into hiding, but she'd kept a few items that most fugitives wouldn't carry. A tactical knife with a carbon fiber handle that wouldn't trigger metal detectors. Lockpicks disguised as everyday items. And a small device that could disrupt electronic security systems for brief periods. She'd also maintained her physical conditioning, running every day and practicing hand-to-hand combat techniques in the privacy of cheap motel rooms. The body remembered what the mind tried to forget, and Maya's body remembered how to be dangerous. Her laptop chimed with an incoming message. Marcus had responded faster than she'd expected. Understand situation. Can be on site by 2200 hours Thursday. Send coordinates and tactical assessment. Maya quickly typed back the GPS coordinates for the Morrison property and attached the intelligence report she'd compiled. Having backup would increase their chances significantly, but she couldn't count on Marcus arriving in time to prevent the trafficking shipment from reaching its destination. She needed a contingency plan that accounted for the possibility of operating alone. Maya spread a hand-drawn map of the Morrison property across her bed, marking the locations of buildings, security measures, and potential approach routes. The concrete warehouse was the primary target, but she also identified several choke points where a small team could control access to the entire site. The key would be timing. If she moved too early, Meridian would simply relocate their operation and continue trafficking women elsewhere. If she moved too late, 6 more victims would disappear into a system designed to make them vanish forever. She would have to wait until the shipment arrived, then prevent it from leaving. Maya was finalizing her operational plan when she heard footsteps in the motel parking lot. Slow, deliberate footsteps that stopped outside her door. She closed the laptop and moved silently to the window, peering through a gap in the curtains. 3 figures stood in the parking lot, barely visible in the weak lighting from the motel office. But Maya recognized them immediately. The same men who'd come to Murphy's Diner the night before looking for an Asian woman with long black hair. They'd found her. Maya grabbed her backpack and moved to the bathroom. But before she could reach the window, she heard the soft click of someone inserting an electronic keycard into her door lock. They weren't just looking for her anymore. They were coming inside. She had perhaps 30 seconds before they entered the room and discovered it was empty. 30 seconds to disappear. Or to make a stand. Maya looked at her reflection in the bathroom mirror one more time, then slowly rolled up her sleeve to expose the tattoo on her forearm. The phoenix rising from flames, surrounded by military insignia and operational symbols that told the story of who she really was. For months she'd been running and hiding, trying to stay invisible while gathering evidence against Meridian's trafficking network. But sometimes, the only way to save innocent lives was to stop being invisible. Sometimes, you had to remember that you were the phoenix, not the flames. Maya Chen took a deep breath, checked her weapons one last time, and prepared to stop running. The door to her motel room opened quietly, and 3 armed men entered expecting to find a helpless fugitive hiding in the darkness. Instead, they found someone who'd decided it was time to fight back. The men who thought she was helpless were about to discover just how wrong they'd been. And before the night was over, the quiet stranger who'd sat alone in Murphy's Diner would reveal exactly what her tattoo really meant. Maya stepped out of the bathroom, no longer trying to hide who she was. "Gentlemen," she said quietly, "I believe you've been looking for me." The 3 men froze when Maya stepped out of the bathroom. They'd expected to find their target cowering and hiding, not calmly walking toward them with the controlled confidence of someone trained for combat. "You're coming with us," the tall, silver-haired man said, his hand moving toward the weapon concealed under his jacket. "Don't make this difficult." Maya stopped 10 feet away, just outside their immediate reach, but close enough to see their faces clearly. She recognized the type, corporate security, well-trained, but overconfident. The kind of men who'd gotten used to intimidating frightened civilians. "I don't think so," Maya replied, her voice steady and calm. "But I am curious about something." "How did you track me to Millbrook?" The man's eyes narrowed. He clearly hadn't expected questions, much less ones delivered with such composure. "That's not your concern. Actually, it is. See, I've been very careful about covering my tracks. New identity documents, cash transactions, random travel patterns. The fact that you found me suggests either I made a mistake or someone with significant resources is funding your operation." Maya began walking slowly to her left, forcing the men to adjust their positions to keep her in sight. It was a subtle psychological technique. By controlling the movement in the room, she was establishing dominance despite being outnumbered. "Enough talking," the second man said, reaching for his gun. "We have our orders." Maya moved before he cleared leather. 5 years of special operations training had given her reflexes most people couldn't match, and months of running had kept those reflexes sharp. She closed the distance between them in 2 quick steps, her hand chopping down on his wrist, before his weapon fully emerged. The gun clattered to the floor as the man yelped in pain. Maya spun him around and wrapped her arm around his throat, using him as a human shield while she addressed his companions. "Here's what's going to happen," she said, her voice still conversational despite the violence that had just erupted. "You're going to answer some questions, and then you're going to leave. If you reach for those weapons, your friend here is going to have a very bad night." The silver-haired man held up his hands, but his expression showed more calculation than fear. "You're only delaying the inevitable. There's nowhere you can run that we won't find you." Who said anything about running? Maya increased the pressure on her captive's throat just enough to make her point. "I'm tired of running. I'm tired of watching innocent women disappear while their families wonder what happened to them." "You don't understand what you're interfering with," the third man said. He was younger than the others, perhaps new to this type of work. "This is bigger than you think. Enlighten me." The silver-haired man shot his colleague a warning look, but Maya caught it. "Let me guess," she continued. "International trafficking network, wealthy clients who prefer young American women, local officials who look the other way in exchange for development money. Am I close?" The silence that followed was answer enough. Maya had suspected the scope of Meridian's operation was larger than what she documented, but the men's reactions confirmed her worst fears. This wasn't just a regional trafficking ring, it was part of something global, something with resources and connections that explained how they'd tracked her across multiple states. "The Morrison girl," Maya said, watching their faces for tells. "Where is she now?" "Gone," the silver-haired man replied with casual cruelty, "like all the others. Like you're going to be if you don't cooperate." Maya felt ice form in her stomach, but her expression remained neutral. Emma Morrison was beyond help, but the 6 women scheduled to arrive Thursday night could still be saved. "Thursday's shipment," she said. "Where are they coming from?" The man in her grip tensed, and she could feel his attempt to signal his companions. Maya adjusted her hold, cutting off his air supply for just a moment, long enough to make her point. "I already know about the warehouse at the development site," she continued. "I know about the delivery schedule. What I need to know is how to stop it." "You can't," the silver-haired man said with absolute certainty. "This operation has protection at every level. Local law enforcement, state officials, federal agencies. People who try to interfere tend to have accidents." Maya nodded thoughtfully. "That explains how you've stayed in business so long. But it also explains why you're here personally instead of sending the authorities after me. You can't afford official attention any more than I can." The realization shifted the dynamic in the room. Maya wasn't just a fugitive they were hunting. She was a threat to an operation worth millions of dollars. They needed her to disappear quietly, which gave her more leverage than they wanted to admit. "Here's my counteroffer," Maya said. "You walk away now, call off Thursday's shipment, and dismantle your operation in Millbrook. In exchange, I don't share what I know with certain federal agencies that aren't on your payroll." "That's not going to happen." Maya had expected that response, but she'd needed to establish the stakes. These men weren't going to be reasoned with or negotiated with. They represented an organization that treated human beings as commodities and that made them enemies in a way that justified whatever she had to do next. "Then we have a problem," Maya said quietly. She drove her elbow back into her captive's solar plexus while simultaneously pushing him forward into his companions. The coordinated movement created confusion and gave her the space she needed to reach into her backpack. The tactical knife came out smooth and fast, its carbon fiber handle warm in her grip. Maya had hoped to avoid violence, but hope was a luxury she couldn't afford when innocent lives were at stake. The younger man was reaching for his gun when Maya's knife caught him across the wrist, opening a shallow but painful cut that made him drop the weapon. She followed up with a knee to his stomach that doubled him over, then spun to face the silver-haired man who was finally drawing his own pistol. Military training took over completely. Maya moved like someone who'd spent years learning to kill efficiently, her body remembering skills that civilian life had temporarily suppressed. The silver-haired man was competent, but he was facing someone who'd been trained by the best and tested in real combat. She closed the distance before he could aim properly, her left hand deflecting his gun arm while her right brought the knife up toward his throat. But instead of cutting, she stopped the blade just short of penetrating skin. "Drop it," she said quietly. The man looked into her eyes and saw something that made him carefully place his weapon on the floor. Maya had given him a glimpse of who she really was, and he understood that she could have killed him but had chosen not to. "Smart choice," Maya said, stepping back while keeping the knife ready. "Now we're going to have a proper conversation." She gestured for all 3 men to sit on the edge of the bed, which they did without argument. The brief exchange of violence had established a new hierarchy in the room and everyone understood their position in it. "Let's start with names," Maya said, settling into the room's single chair. "Real names, not the ones on your fake identification." The silver-haired man hesitated, then apparently decided cooperation was his best option for survival. "David Crane. I work security for Meridian Development." "And your friends?" Paul Martinez, the younger man said, holding his wounded wrist. "Same company." The third man, still rubbing his throat where Maya had grabbed him, remained silent until she looked at him directly. Tony Vesio. Maya committed the names to memory while studying their faces. These weren't random muscle hired for a single job. They were permanent employees of an organization large enough to maintain multiple field teams. "How many sites does Meridian operate?" "I don't know exact numbers," Crane replied. "My team covers the mountain region. Colorado, Montana, Wyoming, parts of Idaho, and Utah. How many women have been trafficked through your area?" Crane's jaw tightened. "I don't keep count." Maya stood up and took a step toward him, the knife still in her hand. "Wrong answer." "Maybe 50, he said quickly, "over the past 2 years. But I just provide security. I'm not involved in the actual operations." 50 women, 50 daughters, sisters, friends, who'd been stolen from their families and sold to the highest bidder. Maya felt rage building in her chest, the same cold fury that had once made her one of the Army's most effective operatives. Thursday's shipment, she said, sitting back down. Details. 6 women from Nebraska and Kansas. They'll be transported to the warehouse Wednesday night, processed Thursday morning, then moved to a distribution center in Denver Thursday evening. What does processed mean? Crane looked uncomfortable. Documentation, medical checks, preparation for transport. Maya's grip tightened on the knife handle, but she kept her expression neutral. Where's the distribution center in Denver? I don't know the exact address. That's above my pay grade. Maya studied his face and decided he was telling the truth. Meridian's operation was compartmentalized, with each team knowing only what they needed to know for their specific role. It was smart operational security, but it also meant these 3 were relatively small fish in a much larger organization. Who's your immediate supervisor? Regional director named Harrison. He coordinates all trafficking operations between the Mississippi and the Pacific. How do I contact him? Crane shook his head. He contacts us. We never reach out directly unless it's an emergency. Maya was running out of useful questions, and she could see the men were starting to think about their options again. She needed to wrap this up before they decided to try something stupid. Here's what's going to happen, she said, standing and moving back to give herself room to react if necessary. You're going to walk out of here and never come back. You're going to tell your boss that I wasn't in Millbrook, that you searched the entire town and found no trace of the woman you were looking for. He'll never believe that, Martinez protested. Then you better be convincing, Maya replied. Because if I see any of you again, if any Meridian personnel show up in Millbrook before Friday morning, then everything I know about your operation goes to every federal agency and news organization in the country. You're bluffing, Crane said, but his voice lacked confidence. Maya pulled out her phone and showed them the screen, which displayed a queued message to multiple recipients. One button push and your entire network gets exposed. Photos, documentation, recorded conversations, financial records, everything. It was partially a bluff. She had substantial evidence, but not everything she claimed. But the men didn't know that. And uncertainty worked in her favor. You have 30 seconds to leave, Maya continued. After that, I start making phone calls. The 3 men looked at each other, clearly weighing their options. They could try to overpower her, but they'd already seen what she was capable of when threatened. They could report back to their supervisor and hope for backup, but that would mean admitting they'd been outmaneuvered by a single person they'd expected to capture easily. This isn't over, Crane said as they moved toward the door. For you it is, Maya replied. Thursday's shipment gets canceled or everyone in the world learns about Meridian development. Your choice. The men filed out without another word, leaving Maya alone in the now silent motel room. She waited until she heard their car start and drive away before allowing herself to relax slightly. But she wasn't naive enough to think they'd actually call off the trafficking operation. They'd regroup, bring reinforcements, and try a different approach. Maya had bought herself time, nothing more. She looked at the tattoo on her forearm, then began preparing for what she knew would be the most dangerous night of her life. Thursday evening, 6 innocent women would arrive at the Morrison property expecting one thing and finding something entirely different. Maya intended to make sure they went home to their families instead. But first, she had to survive whatever Meridian threw at her next, and she had a feeling they were just getting started. Thursday evening arrived gray and cold, with low clouds that promised snow before morning. Maya had spent the day making final preparations while staying out of sight, using back roads and wooded areas to avoid the increased Meridian security presence she knew would be looking for her. Marcus Chen had arrived that afternoon as promised, and Maya felt a surge of relief when she saw his familiar face. He was one of the few people she trusted completely, someone who'd proven his reliability in combat situations where mistakes meant death. You look like hell, Marcus said, when they met at their predetermined rendezvous point, an abandoned barn 3 miles from the Morrison property. Thanks for the pep talk, Maya replied, but she was smiling for the first time in days. Did you bring what I asked for? Marcus gestured to a military-style duffel bag. Body armor, night vision equipment, communications gear, and a few items that aren't exactly legal for civilian possession. I also brought a friend. A second figure emerged from the shadows behind the barn, a woman Maya didn't recognize. Tall and athletic with short blonde hair and the alert bearing of military or law enforcement training. Sarah Mitchell, the woman said, extending her hand. Former FBI, currently working private security. Marcus filled me in on the situation. Maya studied Sarah's face, looking for the tells that would indicate whether this was someone she could trust with innocent lives. What she saw was competence, determination, and the kind of controlled anger that came from encountering human trafficking before. 3 of us against how many? Maya asked Marcus. Unknown, but probably significant numbers. I've been watching the property since this morning. They brought in additional security, at least 12 men that I've identified. plus whatever crew is handling the actual trafficking operation. Maya nodded, having expected heavy resistance. Meridian had invested too much in their Millbrook operation to abandon it without a fight, especially after her confrontation with their security team the night before. "What's the plan?" Sarah asked, checking her weapon with practiced efficiency. Maya spread a hand-drawn map across a makeshift table they'd constructed from old barnwood. "The trafficking victims are scheduled to arrive at 2100 hours. They'll be held in the concrete warehouse overnight, then processed for transport tomorrow evening. Our window is between arrival and dawn. After that, security will be too tight for a rescue operation." "Extraction route?" Marcus asked. "There's a logging road that connects to Highway 87 about 2 miles west of the property. If we can get the victims to that point, Sarah can transport them to safety while we cover the retreat." Sarah studied the map intently. "What about local law enforcement? Can we count on any support?" Maya shook her head. "Meridian has bought cooperation at multiple levels. We have to assume local authorities will either ignore what happens or actively work against us. So we're on our own," Marcus said. Nothing new there. As darkness fell, the three-person team moved into position around the Morrison property. Maya and Marcus would approach the warehouse from the north, using the natural terrain to avoid detection, while Sarah positioned herself near the access road to intercept the arriving transport vehicle. Maya felt the familiar pre-combat calm settling over her as they moved through the pine forest toward their target. It was a feeling she'd missed during her months in hiding, the clarity that came from having a clear mission and the skills to accomplish it. Through her night vision goggles, she could see the warehouse building clearly outlined against the surrounding construction equipment. Meridian had indeed increased security, with armed guards posted at regular intervals around the property perimeter. "Contact," Sarah's voice whispered through their communications system. "Vehicle approaching from the south. Looks like a modified van, definitely not local." Maya checked her watch. 20:50, 2 hours. "Right on schedule." "Roger that," Marcus replied. "We're in position, waiting for your signal." Maya watched through her scope as the van pulled up to the warehouse entrance. 4 men got out, followed by 6 women who moved with the uncertain steps of people who'd been drugged or sedated. Even from a distance, Maya could see they were young, probably between 18 and 25, exactly fitting the profile she'd identified in her research. One of the women stumbled and was roughly pushed forward by one of the guards. Maya's finger tightened on her rifle's trigger guard, but she forced herself to wait. Moving too early would jeopardize the entire rescue operation. The warehouse door opened, and Maya caught a glimpse of the interior, bright lights, several more guards, and what appeared to be holding cells along one wall. Her worst fears about Meridian's operation were being confirmed in real time. "All victims are inside the building," she reported quietly. "Count confirms 6 women, estimated 8 to 10 guards total." "Copy that," Sarah replied. "I'm moving to secondary position." Maya and Marcus began their approach, using the shadows and construction equipment to get within 50 meters of the warehouse. From this distance, Maya could see 2 guards posted outside the building and movement visible through the ventilation grates. "Marcus, can you take the west entrance when I give the signal?" "Affirmative." "What about surveillance systems?" Maya had already identified the security cameras and their likely blind spots. "I'll handle electronic countermeasures. Give me 60 seconds, then move on my mark." She pulled out the signal jamming device she'd carried since her military days, a piece of equipment that could disrupt wireless communications and surveillance systems for a limited time. It wasn't military grade, but it would create enough confusion to give them the advantage they needed. Maya activated the device and immediately saw several security lights flicker and go dark. In the distance, she heard someone shouting about radio problems. "Mark," she whispered. Maya and Marcus moved simultaneously, approaching the warehouse from opposite directions, while the guards were distracted by their malfunctioning equipment. Maya reached her assigned position first, taking down the nearest guard with a sleeper hold that left him unconscious but alive. The second guard noticed his colleague's absence and was reaching for his radio when Marcus appeared behind him. A brief struggle ended with another unconscious guard and clear access to the building's main entrance. Maya tested the door and found it unlocked. Overconfidence on Meridian's part, but understandable given their belief that they operated with complete impunity in Millbrook. The interior of the warehouse was exactly what Maya had expected and worse than she'd hoped. The 6 women were confined in makeshift cells along the far wall, while several Meridian personnel sat at tables covered with paperwork and computers. The whole operation had the clinical efficiency of people who'd done this many times before. "Federal agents!" Maya shouted, knowing the lie would create confusion and hesitation. "Everyone on the ground, now!" The response was immediate chaos. Some of the guards reached for weapons, while others dove for cover behind tables and equipment. Maya had anticipated this reaction and was already moving, using the warehouse's concrete support pillars for protection while engaging the armed personnel. Marcus entered from the opposite side, his military training evident in the precise way he controlled his sector of the building. Together, they'd created a crossfire that made it nearly impossible for the guards to mount an effective defense. "Keys!" Maya called to one of the Meridian personnel she'd pinned down behind a desk. "Where are the cell keys?" "Go to hell," the man replied. Maya put a bullet into the concrete 6 inches from his head, the ricocheting fragments convincing him to reconsider his position. He pointed toward a keyring hanging near the building's entrance. Maya retrieved the keys while Marcus maintained suppressing fire, keeping the remaining guards pinned down and unable to coordinate a counterattack. The first cell opened to reveal 2 terrified young women who'd been told they were coming to work at a resort. "I'm here to help," Maya said quickly, showing them her military tattoo as proof of her legitimacy. "Stay low and move toward the exit when I tell you." She worked quickly through the remaining cells, finding all 6 women alive but obviously traumatized by their experience. Most had been drugged during transport and were still disoriented, but they were coherent enough to understand that rescue was at hand. "Sarah, we need immediate extraction," Maya called through her radio. 6 victims, multiple hostile forces still active. "On my way," Sarah's voice crackled back. "Transport vehicles secured, route is clear." Maya began moving the women toward the warehouse entrance, using hand signals to coordinate with Marcus, who was still engaged with the remaining Meridian personnel. They were almost to the door when additional vehicles arrived outside, their headlights visible through the building's high windows. "Reinforcements!" Marcus called out. "Looks like we're about to have company." Maya made a quick tactical decision. Getting the women to safety was the primary mission, but that wouldn't be possible if they were pinned down inside the warehouse by superior numbers. "I'm going to create a distraction," she told Marcus. "Get the women to Sarah's position." "Negative," Marcus replied immediately. "We stick together." Maya was already moving toward the warehouse's electrical panel. "This isn't a democracy, soldier. Get them out of here." She found what she was looking for: the main power distribution system for the warehouse. A few quick cuts with her knife would plunge the building into darkness and create the confusion they needed. But as Maya reached for the electrical panel, she heard a voice that made her blood run cold. "Stop right there, Major Chen." She turned slowly to see David Crane emerging from the shadows near the building's rear entrance. But he wasn't alone. Beside him stood a man in an expensive suit, whose face Maya recognized from military briefings she'd hoped never to see again. Colonel James Harrison, former Army intelligence, currently wanted by multiple federal agencies for war crimes and corruption. The man who'd destroyed Maya's military career when she'd tried to expose his illegal arms-dealing operation. The man who'd forced her into hiding and made her a fugitive from her own government. "Hello, Maya," Harrison said with a cold smile. "It's been a long time." Maya felt everything click into place. Meridian Development wasn't just a trafficking operation. It was Harrison's new criminal enterprise, using his military contacts and expertise to build a network that spanned multiple states and countries. "You always were too idealistic for your own good," Harrison continued. "Even now, risking everything to save a few strangers who will probably end up dead anyway." "Better than making money off human misery," Maya replied, her hand moving slowly toward her weapon. Harrison noticed the movement and raised his own pistol. "I don't think so. You've caused me enough trouble already." But Maya was no longer the naive young officer who'd trusted the system to do the right thing. She was a combat veteran who'd learned that sometimes justice had to be taken, rather than given. "You want to know what this tattoo really means?" Maya asked, rolling up her sleeve to expose the phoenix design in full. "It's not just about rising from ashes. It's about becoming something stronger than what tried to destroy you." Maya dove sideways as Harrison fired, the bullet passing through the space where she'd been standing a split second earlier. She rolled behind a concrete support pillar and came up with her rifle. "The thing about phoenixes," Maya called out, "is that they don't stay hidden forever. The firefight that followed was brief but intense." Maya used every skill she'd learned in 5 years of special operations, moving through the warehouse like someone who'd been born for combat. Harrison was good, but he'd gotten soft in his years of corporate crime, while Maya had stayed sharp through months of running and fighting. When the shooting stopped, Harrison lay motionless near the warehouse entrance, and Maya was already moving toward the exit where Marcus waited with the rescued women. "Time to go," Marcus said simply. Maya took one last look around the warehouse that had been intended as a way station for human trafficking. Tomorrow, this place would be a crime scene investigated by federal agents. The women who'd been imprisoned here would go home to their families, and Meridian Development's operation in Millbrook would be permanently shut down. Outside, Sarah was waiting with a vehicle large enough to transport all 6 women safely. As they loaded the rescued victims, Maya felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the satisfaction of a mission accomplished and innocent lives saved. What happens now? one of the young women asked as they prepared to leave. She was probably 19, with the kind of trusting eyes that human traffickers preyed upon. Maya looked at her tattoo one more time, then rolled down her sleeve. "Now you go home," she said gently, and I stopped running. As they drove away from the Morrison property, Maya pulled out her secure phone and began making calls to federal agents she'd once worked with, people who would believe her story and act on the evidence she'd gathered. It was time for Maya Chen to stop being invisible. Time for the phoenix to fully rise from the ashes and reclaim her place in the world. The people of Millbrook would wake up the next morning to discover that their quiet visitor had been much more than she'd seemed. The woman they'd thought was helpless had actually been the one person capable of saving victims they'd never even known were in danger. And sometimes, that's exactly what heroes look like. Ordinary people who choose to do extraordinary things when no one else will. Maya's tattoo told the story of someone who'd risen from destruction stronger than before. But more importantly, it told the story of someone who'd never forgotten that with power comes responsibility, and with privilege comes the obligation to protect those who can't protect themselves. In Millbrook, Montana, that story had just begun its next chapter.